Hello dear learners, let me continue the discussion on important work related attitudes as I have started in the previous session. So some of the important work related attitudes that I have already discussed in the previous session were job satisfaction, organizational commitment and employee engagement. The other impacted factors we are going to talk about in this session. So another important work related attitude is about employee empowerment. As Thomas and Welthouse mentioned, employee empowerment simply means give power to. Power means energy. It's basically to energize somebody, it's a motivational usage of the form to energize somebody to work in the direction required for the achievement of the goals, accomplishment of the goals, right? So if you focus on the definition which are mentioned in the references mentioned here, empowerment means the heightened level of intrinsic task motivation or internalized commitment to a task as evident in the four assessments of that task, in the sense of impact, competence, meaningfulness and choice. So let's look into what are the four important cognitions as they mentioned by the authors. So if you look into the aspect of employee empowerment as the important concept, four cognitions are making impact, having competence, having experience of meaningfulness, and of course the choice is defined in terms of internalized commitment to your tasks, right? First of all, impact. Impact is about difference in your work through your actions. When you are doing your job, if you are doing some kind of task, what kind of impact that you are trying to make, in terms of difference that you are trying to make with your actions, that defines the impact, right? Competence, on the other hand, its competence is basically how much able or competent you are to perform your task with the skill sets that you have, right? So that is basically more of competence. Meaningfulness, that whatever work that you are doing in the organization, how you are deriving meaning out of it, right? It's basically what is the value in terms of your accomplishment of the work that you are doing, that is to do with the meaningfulness. And finally, choice, where the authors mention about this is behavior is self determined, right? So these are the four important cognitions which authors mentioned, very important in light of the task that you are doing with respect to heightened level of intrinsic motivation among the people, right? Let's look into some of the the research studies, especially in case of the Indian case study. We look into some of the research study which I have mentioned here. See, psychological empowerment, as the research study mentioned, if you look at the paper number 1 here by Garg, Atri and Kumar, they talked about that Indian public sector employees, people who are working in the public sector banks, it was found that this particular psychological empowerment, if you look at, they lead to the innovative work behavior among people. So say that for that to happen, psychological empowerment to happen, two important leadership styles they have mentioned. One is transformational leadership, that if you are working with transformational leaders, it can lead to the experience of the psychological empowerment among people. Another is empowering leadership that they talked about, right? So empowering leadership are the another. So two papers they have mentioned. One paper specifically mentioned about transformational leadership. Another paper talked about empowering leadership, which relates to the impact of psychological empowerment, and it relates to the innovative behavior among public and private sector, right? Now, empowerment is a very important mechanism that leads to job performance. So you see, two studies we have talked about. In one, they have talked about innovative work behavior. In other, it talked about job performance. In both these studies, one study talked about transformational leadership, another talked about empowering leadership, by considering psychological empowerment as an important psychological underlying mechanism, right? Now, in terms of how one can enhance employee empowerment, what to do inside the organization which can lead to heightened levels of empowerment amongst employee. So HR practices can be designed in a way which can lead to the high performance practices. So if you look at the source number 3 here, Seibert and colleagues, they have done the meta-analytic review of the antecedents and consequences of psychological empowerment, and found out the role of four important factors: support from organization, in terms of psychological support. There is a trust, leadership such as empowering and charismatic and transformational, as we have also seen in other studies, it's mentioned, and work design, in terms of meaningfulness, autonomy and feedback. These are some of the factors. If the organization can take into consideration, it can really lead to the highest level of psychological empowerment among their employees there, right? Now let's look at how employee empowerment works, what managers need to do. It says that to make employees empowerment efforts work, and if you follow the work of Bowen and Lauer, they in both the sources they have mentioned that the manager should play an active role in empowering their employees. How will you empower? It says that empowerment is a function of power, information, knowledge and rewards. What is the meaning of this? It says that managers should ensure that employees are given the information with respect to the performance of the organization, right? Also, rewards which are clearly, specifically based on the organizational performance. Also, knowledge, that help employees understand that how their efforts are contributing towards increasing the organizational performance. And also, these people should also have power in terms of their involvement in making the decisions and taking the directions so that they can increase the performance. So if these four things are taken care of, then we can say that more power, more information, more knowledge and rewards can lead to higher level of empowerment among employees. Now if this is done, what will happen? This will lead to employees to feel an empowered state of mind as per the work of Bowen and Lawler 1994, because it will give people more control, they will be more aware and there will be more accountability in their actions. So this is how the the empowerment effort can work in the organization, right? Next important variable is to do with professionalism. Yeah, see, we'll talk about this, because of increased complexity due to technological and educational advancement, the occupations and professions are, becoming highly complex. They are becoming much more advanced, right? So what happen is, what is the role of professional? If you look at, especially in the professional organization, the role is to look for and design and, basically writing down or establish and also control or govern the standards of profession, as Rene mentioned. See, so what we'll call as professions, what are the things which will be called as professions? It can be considered in terms of very professional way of undergoing education and training, right? And there also is talked about existence of the code of conduct to complete that particular education, right? There should be a sophisticated evaluation system. That's how we call it as a complete profession. For example, engineering, medicine and things like that, right? So if you talk about the public sector organization and professionals, if you look at, you will see some kind of conflict you will see. For example, professionals, because they have expertise, they want to do things in their own way, in terms of enjoying more autonomy, but then they have to work according to the organizational rules and hierarchy. So sometimes that kind of thing can also happen. So public sector organizations, especially leaders, have to find out ways how you can deal with this kind of things, so that you can guarantee professionalism can lead to higher levels of performance, because professionalism considered to be more motivating factor in the public sector organization. Now Rene and colleagues talked about in terms of practices to motivate professionals is basically to have doer career ladders, in which you give them the options to continue to promote them higher in their area of domain, right? You continue to provide them the promotions within the area of their research or the profession. or you take them on rotations, in the sense that you take them from their research area to maybe a management position, and after the tenure is over, absorb them into their original the parent research area of the work that they are doing, and also provide them a lot of funding for the professional development. It's mostly happening in the professions such as which require a lot of academic the input, especially if you look at the scientists, the researchers, the academicians, a lot of other people. So you need to provide them as an organizational support, these people much more funding, so that they can have professional development, they can continue to grow in their careers, right? Now, with this we come to the final concluding section of this particular module, which is to do with the positive organizational behavior from the contribution from the area of positive psychology. Now, this particular is based content is based on the work of Luthans, Yusuf and Avolio in the paper titled Psychological Capital: Investing and Developing Positive Organizational Behavior, published in Positive Organizational Behavior, right? Let's look into how positive organizational behavior first of all is defined, and we'll look into the application of positive organizational behavior in the context of public sector organization, right? First of all, authors defined psychological capital. Luthans and colleagues 2007 defined psychological capital in terms of an individual's positive psychological state of development, which is further defined in terms of self-efficacy, optimism, hope and resilience. Let's look into what is the meaning of this, right? Now, when we talk about self-efficacy, it's about it's about the confidence that one has in his or her abilities, right? That it will lead to take into the work and succeed in the various challenging tasks. So, it is about more of ability, confidence in one's ability, that once you start doing some kind of work, your efforts will lead to succeeding in the challenging task. So, it is about your confidence in your abilities, right? Optimism is about you are having the personality in such a way that you are continuously thinking of success now and in future. So, you are very, very optimistic about what is going to happen in terms of success to you now and in future. That's what the authors define. Then, in terms of hope, hope is about that completely persevering, continue to put in efforts towards the accomplishment of your goals, right? And you are hopeful that if you really you will succeed if you continue to work very hard on the goals, and of course, as and required, bring in changes in your paths along the way, right? Resilience, on the other hand, is basically about somebody's ability to attain success even if after facing failures, and you confront adversities, but you do not give up, you come back, you bounce back with a lot of energy and then start proving yourself. Let us look into these one by one and how one can actually develop the positive psychological capital, and more specific to actually work in the area of public sector organization. So, self-efficacy I have already talked about. It's about your confidence. You have confidence in your abilities. I have given some references. If you want to know more about the definitions and other things, you can always look into the references mentioned here. It's basically the confidence that people have in within them, that in their abilities, right, which will motivate them to continue to put in efforts in the direction so that they will succeed in that particular task, right? So, when people have this kind of confidence, what is the importance of then this kind of confidence? Importance is it will then lead to higher level of performance among the individuals, because people really believe in their abilities and they are very, very confident about it, right? It can lead to higher level of job satisfaction. It can lead to higher level of commitment among the employees. That's what we need to look into, right? So, having self-efficacy, it's a good thing, and because it relates to positively to various factors, right? But the question here is, can somebody develop self-efficacy? can organizations help people develop self-efficacy, right? So the research says that one can develop self-efficacy by doing multiple things, right? You can involve yourself in the challenging task and mastery experience. Succeed in the challenging task. Take up the work which will provide lot of challenge to you, and you do your best as far as their abilities are concerned, and you learn in the experience when you do lot of challenging work, right? Second thing which is mentioned is about vicarious learning. Vicarious learning is that you please also observe other people who are doing challenging work, learn from them what they are doing, right? So look for the people who have done work before, what kind of changes they have brought in, what are their accomplishments, and learn from them, right? And when you learn, see them, you also get a lot of confidence in your abilities that you are also able to do that. Then verbal persuasion can also help. As an organization, people should also when you indulge into the efforts and do challenging work, and then there is a verbal persuasion from the people around, then also it will boost your confidence, and also positive feedback on your jobs done, positive feedback, and of course the encouragement. And all these are mentioned in the paper which I have mentioned on the slides. Please refer to this paper to find out more about in terms of development of self-efficacy through mastery of challenging experiences, right? Vicarious learning, verbal persuasion, positive feedback, and the encouragement therein, right? Next is about hope. Hope is I will talk about it's the state of mind. Your state of mind is that you are very much determined to do what that you want to achieve your goal, right? Achievement is your end state that you are looking at, and you are hopeful that the kind of efforts and the path you will choose, it will lead to the better outcomes, right? First is, it's basically about determination, your determination to look into your goals. Please look into the definition of hope given by in the reference number 1 here. Hope is about determination to achieve goals, and it is about your how much determined you are to achieve your goals. And second is that how much efforts you are putting in terms of finding out the means, processes, what is the way that you want to take, what is the path that you are going to take. That's what define your hope. Now, what is the importance of significance of the hope? If people are hopeful, if people are having hope, what it will do? If people are having high levels of hope, it will lead to improvement in the well-being of employees, okay, and it also make them much more resilient. We'll talk about that also. It positively relate to the state of happiness. It can lead to higher level of performance, and of course higher level of satisfaction, and also it provide lot of ability to cope with the situation or the adversities and so on and so forth, right? Now, in case of development of hope, how can somebody develop hope as important dimension of psychological capital? How sometime people can develop hope? Take on challenges, right? Take on goals which are challenging goals, okay? Or what you can also do is, you can also design sub goals. You design your milestone in such a way that you first of all try to create the broader goals into your sub goals for yourself, and try to see how you are doing in that, and try to identify what are the problems, identification of the problems along the way, okay? That can also help you develop the hope. Also look at, we talked about in hope, ways, paths. Try to find out multiple ways, alternative ways to reach your goals, multiple ways or alternative ways to reach your goal. If required, also you can work on revising your goals. Sometimes what happen, you end up deciding some kind of goals for yourself which are completely unrealistic, and it will do nothing but create a false hope in your mind. So you need to sometime also change that kind of goal which are more unrealistic. As an organization, what you can do is, in order to increase somebody hope, you can actually give them resources, give people resources. You can also give them information, and also authority is another important factor which are mentioned in research to increase hope, right? So this is what people can do in terms of enhancing somebody's hope, as an important state or dimension in psychological capital, right? Then comes optimism. Now, optimism, hope is about, what is the difference between hope and optimism I am going to talk about now. Hope is more about that you are determined to reach your goals and you find out the ways to reach at that particular. Optimism on the other hand is about your experiences, right? In terms of, for example, whatever positive happened to you in the past, you feel that it is because of your internal, personal, I would say the input. But something if is something wrong that had happened, something which is a negative event, you consider it to be more temporary. You say, no, it is nothing to do with this thing, it's a temporary phase, it will also pass. But if you are not, if you are considering no, everything is negative around, so you are not optimistic. But if you consider negative events as something which is a temporary phase, then of course your optimism is very, very high, right? So in terms of optimism, it says that you consider positive events attributed to the, your internal, and this is something which is a more of a permanent, state, as been mentioned by Schuller and Seligman in the paper. But at the same time, you also say that the negative events, they are temporary and they are situation specific. So if it is the case, you are more optimistic, right? So what will optimism do? What is the importance of optimism? Optimism enhances the performance. See, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the module I talked about, we are talking about the aspect of performance. So all these things are related to the performance. There is higher level of satisfaction in life. Psychological well-being is good and people are happy when they are optimistic. Now, how to develop optimism, and all these resources are mentioning about some of the technique to deal with optimism. It's about whatever happened has wrong in past, be lenient with your past. Don't hold what has happened in the past and that was wrong. If you hold that, if you have that kind of a baggage, you will never be optimistic, right? You appreciate your present, what is happening now, please appreciate that. And finally, always try to seek opportunity for future, opportunity for future, always try to see. So these are some of the ways with which one can actually consider developing optimism in oneself as psychological capital is concerned. Last is final, which is talked about resilience. Talked about Luthans and Yusuf talked about in terms of resilience, that even if in the face of failure or difficult situations and adversities or some kind of problems related to conflict, how you bounce back. This is basically how you have adapted or learned this particular capacity to bounce back. That's what is defined in terms of resilience. Now, what resilience can do? Resilience is all about again related performance, and in public sector organization is much more, because you are actually involved in much more challenging task, much more challenging work that you are doing, right? So how can somebody develop resilience? What is required? See, when it is resilience, we're talking about the problems that you can encounter, the risk that you can encounter, right? So how you will actually mitigate those risks? What can help you is resources can help you. Acquire resources, information resources, skills resources, learning from the experiences, build relationships, right? Within the organization, network relationship which will help you. Let's say public sector organization, right? So when you are, let's say as an administrator, you have to do a lot of work. You have political authority, you have local bodies, local agencies, you have NGOs, you have citizens. You build a relationship with the network, because these people will come to your aid when you will face adversity and there are problems there, right? Because these resources, they will do what? They will enhance your success, right? So focus on resources. Another thing is always look for the factors which leads to high level of risk. For example, stress and the conflict, right? So try to minimize the factors which will lead to the stress and conflict, right? And also whenever you are in identifying opportunities, you are trying to experiment with opportunities. Also try to take the risk which are calculative risk. Don't experiment too much. Think of doing it in that way because you have learned through your various experiences, right? Now, these are the four important, the psychological capital variables in terms of positive organizational behavior, which are important and worth discussion. Why we are discussing about this is another important thing, right? In case of positive organizational behavior and what are the implications of the public sector, your text mentioned, Rene, Fernandez and Malatesta, they mentioned that the context of the public sector organization is way different, where there is a greater external influence, there more formalization of the processes, a lot of conflict and ambiguity in goals are there. There is a lot of political influences, a lot of things, distinctive character of the public sector organization. So, when there are a lot of challenges like these are there, so in that way what happen is this kind of work environment, right, which is more complex, it require people to have higher level of psychological capital, and it is the duty of the organizational leaders and the administrator to help their members to develop the psychological capital, right? As a mentor, as a coach, as a senior person, administrator, you please help the younger employees or administrators who are entering into the administration. You prepare them, guide them in such a way that they develop resources, they increase their ability, they learn from learned capacity to deal with adversity. So all these things are really very important, right? So last final is the surviving and thriving in the public sector. This is based on the text by Cohen, Imeek and Haikila, the effective public managers. I'll quickly do that, how things are changing and how surviving and thriving in public service is important. See that there is a lot of change happening in the functioning of the government, and you'll see that a lot of digitalization, process changes, innovations are happening, new policies coming up with. So, with these all changes, what is happening is the traditional way of public management is changing, right? The public managers today, as the text mentioned, they are required to be trained in social network communication, e-government, innovation, sustainability and things like that. So, what happen is this particular more complex problems, because they are confronting organization, there is a need for highly educated, flexible and innovative managers and professionals which continue to, this particular need continue to grow, right? We need people. But the issue is the question here is the inclination towards public sector careers. We talked about in public sector motivation, inclination towards public sector careers. They have both talked about costs and benefits. Cost in terms of, because of the complexity of the environment, the energies and the temperaments and the competencies and the, of course, psychological capital, attitudes or the motives. We have seen that of course you will require a different kind of temperament to deal with this thing, but at the same time there are a lot of benefits attached to it. The kind of meaning and the purpose that you are going to derive from that function is going to be huge. Of course there are costs, there are difficulties, there are complex situations that you have to deal with, but also the benefits attached to public service are huge. The kind of meaning that you will derive from this particular work is going to be much more, right? So, with this I am going to conclude this entire module on public service motivation. We have talked about at length about various aspects of motivated behavior within the context of public sector organization. We have talked about public motivation, service motivation at length, then important work related attitudes, positive organizational behavior, and finally surviving and thriving in public sector, right? So, in the next week we are going to start very interesting topic, which is effective leadership in public organization, where I am going to discuss about very interesting case studies for you. So, I would suggest you to keep reading and referring to the material that I am sharing with all of you through the slides references to enhance your understanding of the content in the course. I will see you in the next session.